the Shroud of Turin is a burial cloth that's imprinted with what many believe is the actual image of Jesus after his crucifixion. Finding that the cloth does indeed date back to the time of Christ, and with artificial intelligence having something to say about the shroud as well.
When scientists fed images of the Shroud of Turin into artificial intelligence, they expected answers, but the results shattered every expectation.
And when it's exhibited, no explanation is given, or at least none has been recorded, as to where it came from.
AI revealed patterns and signals so intricate, so impossible, that researchers call them profoundly unsettling.
As far as the shroud being an interesting historical object, something that it's worth studying and worth thinking about, it doesn't matter at all if it's real.
Hidden structures appeared in the fabric that could not belong to any medieval artifact, alongside radiation signatures that defy known physics.
When those guys came out with their carbon-14, they tested the wrong piece. Nobody's proved it a fake yet.
The discoveries have left the scientific community speechless, forcing a radical reevaluation of what was thought possible in ancient technology.
The shroud is probably the most intensely studied artifact in human history.
The shocking unveil. A recent three-dimensional digital study using artificial intelligence has just presented strong evidence that the image on the Shroud of Turin was not formed by direct contact with a real human body, but was more likely produced as a deliberate work of medieval religious art. The findings challenge the long-held belief that the cloth served as Jesus' burial shroud, while offering a clear, technically grounded explanation for how the image may have been created. The research was published in the academic journal Archaeometry and conducted by Brazilian digital graphics specialist and 3D designer Cícero Moraes. Using accessible modeling software, including MakeHuman, Blender, and Cloud Compare, the study simulated how fabric behaves when draped over different forms. Two scenarios were tested in detail, one involving a fully three-dimensional human body, and the other using a low-relief sculpture, defined as a flat surface with shallow raised contours. The Turin shroud itself measures approximately 14.5 feet in length and 3.7 feet in width. It bears a faint image of a man marked with wounds that resemble those associated with crucifixion. For centuries, many have believed the cloth wrapped the body of Jesus following his death more than 2,000 years ago. At the same time, the shroud has been the subject of persistent controversy since its first recorded appearance in the 14th century. Radiocarbon testing conducted in 1989 dated the cloth to a period between 1260 and 1390 CE, placing it firmly in the medieval era. Although later researchers questioned whether the tested sample came from a repaired section of the fabric, the debate over its age remains unresolved. In Moraes' digital simulations, the results between the two models differed sharply. When a virtual cloth was draped over a whole human body, the resulting image appeared stretched and distorted because fabric naturally flows over rounded forms. This effect, known as the Agamemnon mask effect, produces widened, misshapen features similar to those seen on specific ancient burial masks. By contrast, when the same cloth was placed over a low-relief surface, the resulting imprint closely matched the proportions, clarity, and overall appearance of the image seen on the Shroud of Turin. The low-relief model showed far less distortion and aligned more consistently with the observed contours on the cloth, particularly in the face and body outline. The study suggests that a shallow, sculpted form made of wood, stone, or metal could have served as a mold. Heat or pigment may have been selectively applied to the raised areas of this surface, allowing the image to transfer cleanly onto the fabric. This process would explain why the shroud's image appears flat and uniform, rather than warped, which would be expected if a real body had been wrapped in linen. While the study acknowledges that a bodily origin cannot be completely ruled out, the digital evidence strongly favors an artistic explanation. Moraes did not attempt to identify the exact materials or techniques used, but concluded that the shroud is best understood as a funerary object created with considerable technical skill. This interpretation aligns with known artistic practices of the medieval period, when low-relief depictions of religious figures were common across Europe, particularly on tombs and memorials. Shallow carvings were a familiar and well-developed method, making the proposed process consistent with the artistic knowledge of the time. Surprisingly, Moraes' AI analysis was not the only study to apply artificial intelligence to the shroud this year. Several independent examinations used similar technologies, yet unlike Moraes' work, they made no definitive claims. Instead, the results of these AI-based scans raised new questions and deepened the mystery surrounding the image rather than resolving it. Decoding the mystery using AI. For centuries, the Shroud of Turin has been examined with microscopes, X-rays, and every major scientific technique available, yet no single test has ever delivered a decisive answer. Today, artificial intelligence is offering a new way to study the ancient linen, revealing subtle features that had remained beyond the limits of human observation. The first AI-driven insights emerged when high-resolution images of the cloth were analyzed using pattern recognition systems and wave-frequency models. These programs identified excellent parallel lines running at consistent intervals within the weave. The markings were so faint that they had long been absorbed into the fabric's natural appearance and dismissed as age-related wear or minor imperfections. Instead, the AI classified them as organized and repeating structures, suggesting an underlying order embedded directly in the cloth. These observations do not establish the shroud's authenticity or explain how it was created. Still, they do reveal a level of complexity that is difficult to reconcile with known artistic or manufacturing methods. Even if the image were produced artificially, the precision implied by these patterns would require a degree of control and technical understanding that exceeds what is known of both medieval and modern forgery techniques. Some researchers have pushed this idea further, suggesting that the detected structures may function like latent information encoded into the linen itself. At the same time, AI has been applied in a more interpretive direction. Image generation systems such as Midjourney have reconstructed lifelike human faces based on the shroud's faint features, giving the cloth a renewed visual presence across digital platforms. Whether accurate or speculative, these images reflect a powerful human impulse to see the individual behind the fabric. A second wave of AI studies shifted attention to the larger body image and the bloodstains. Deep learning models trained to detect fine anomalies examined alignment, coloration, and spectral data across both the front and back impressions. These analyses revealed subtle streaks within the blood, directional changes in the sepia-toned linen, and minute variations in color intensity. Such details are too delicate and numerous to be reliably identified through traditional analysis alone, and they suggest a process far more intricate than painting, burning, or simple contact. The bloodstains themselves produced some of the most striking results. Earlier studies confirmed the presence of hemoglobin and other biological markers, but AI detected faint grid-like textures within the stains. This pattern implies that whatever formed the image interacted with the blood's liquid components in a consistent, highly structured manner. Whether driven by chemical reactions, physical forces, or an unknown mechanism, the interaction appears unusually precise. Multispectral analysis deepened the puzzle further. By evaluating ultraviolet, infrared, and visible wavelength simultaneously, AI revealed features invisible to the naked eye. Certain areas showed signals linked to subtle alterations in the cellulose fibers, patterns that closely aligned with the figure's anatomical details. These included indications of muscle tension, limb positioning, and gentle facial contours, even in regions where no clear surface image is visible. Among the most puzzling findings are those connected to a speculative idea often described as energy imprinting. This concept proposes that the image is not composed of added material, but is instead encoded within the molecular or structural arrangement of the linen itself. AI detected acceptable variations in fiber orientation, density, and reflectivity across broad sections of the cloth, forming organized patterns that appear to support this possibility, though it remains unproven. What do these findings actually point to? If the patterns are genuine, were they formed by chance or by design? And how could such precision exist on a cloth created centuries before modern technology? Early scientific curiosity. In 1898, photographer Secondo Pia captured images of the Shroud of Turin that stunned the world and transformed its history.
Ever since the shroud first really appears in history, there's been controversy about it, and there have been questions about its authenticity.
The photographs revealed a clarity never before seen, opening the door to systematic scientific study and attracting researchers from across disciplines. From that point onward, the shroud became the focus of sustained investigation, with theories emerging from chemistry, biology, medical forensics, and optical image analysis. Over time, the scientific study of the shroud coalesced into three main areas: material analysis, biological and forensic examination, and image analysis. The first direct scientific inspection of the shroud took place between 1969 and 1973, aimed primarily at assessing preservation needs and determining suitable testing methods. This work led to the formation of an 11-member Turin Commission, tasked with advising on both conservation and future research. 5 of the commission members were scientists, and in 1973 they conducted preliminary studies on small fabric samples to understand the cloth's composition and condition better. A major advance came in 1976, when physicists John P. Jackson and Eric Jumper and photographer William Modern applied image analysis techniques initially developed for aerospace research to the shroud. Building on their efforts, the three scientists joined more than 30 experts from multiple fields in 1977 to establish the Shroud of Turin research project. By 1978, this group, widely known as STURP, was granted direct and unprecedented access to the cloth itself. That same year, working independently from the Shroud of Turin research project, or STURP, Giovanni Tamburelli created a three-dimensional rendering of the shroud at CSELT, achieving higher resolution than previous studies. Tamburelli also succeeded in electronically removing the blood markings over the face, enabling researchers to examine the underlying facial image with greater clarity. In October 1978, STURP scientists collected 32 samples from the shroud using adhesive tape. 18 were taken from areas with body or blood imagery, while 14 were taken from regions without visible imagery. Walter McCrone, a chemical microscopist renowned for authenticating historical documents and artworks, analyzed the samples using polarized light microscopy and other techniques. He concluded that the body image had been created with a diluted red ochre pigment, mixed into a collagen-based tempera, applied using a method similar to that of 14th-century European artists. McCrone also suggested that the bloodstains were enhanced with vermilion pigment, and reported finding no actual blood in the samples. Other STURP members strongly disputed these conclusions. Based on their own analyses, they argued that pigments could not account for the shroud's image. Mark Anderson, a Raman microscopy specialist who worked alongside McCrone, found that the samples behaved as organic material when exposed to laser analysis. Ongoing disagreements led McCrone to resign from STURP in June 1980, and he returned all tape samples in his possession to Ray Rogers. Later examinations by John Heller and Alan Adler confirmed the presence of iron oxide in the cloth, but suggested it could not have caused the image. They noted that the exceptional chemical purity of the fibers, combined with comparisons to other ancient textiles, indicated that while flax absorbs iron selectively during processing, the iron itself was not responsible for forming the image. McCrone continued to defend his position long after leaving STURP. Through journal articles, public lectures, and his 1996 book, he maintained that the shroud had been painted in the 14th century and contained no real blood. He further argued that STURP researchers lacked sufficient expertise in chemical microanalysis of historical artworks, and that their failure to detect pigments was consistent with the limits of their instruments. In recognition of his broader contributions to chemistry, McCrone received the American Chemical Society's National Award in Analytical Chemistry in 2000. Despite decades of research and countless laboratory experiments, no one has been able to reproduce the shroud's image under controlled conditions, leaving scientists to marvel at how such a sophisticated relic could have existed centuries ago. So, how was the shroud made? The divine process. After years of testing and analysis, STURP reached a striking conclusion.
The Shroud of Turin is this amazing relic. At bottom, it's a piece of cloth.
They could not explain how the linen came to carry the faint image of a bearded man marked with wounds consistent with crucifixion. That absence of a clear answer opened the door to decades of debate. In the years that followed, researchers and commentators proposed a wide range of explanations. Some argued that natural processes were responsible, others pointed to the technical skill of medieval relic makers, and still others suggested extraordinary physical events connected to the resurrection. Each theory offered confidence, yet none succeeded in settling the question. One of the most common claims is that the image is a painting, a view supported by Brazilian digital graphics specialist and 3D designer Cicero Moraes. If this were true, chemical analysis should reveal pigments or dyes, as it does in the study of historic paintings. STURP researchers, however, found no such materials in amounts capable of forming the image, nor any evidence of brushstrokes. The image itself is extremely faint and barely visible to the naked eye. Further analysis showed that the color does not come from a surface-applied substance or from absorbed material. Instead, the flax fibers themselves are discolored. Unlike paint or dye, this discoloration cannot be dissolved, bleached, or altered using standard chemical treatments. Based on these findings, the STURP team concluded that the image represents the physical form of a scourged and crucified man and is not the work of an artist. The cloth also bears genuine bloodstains, identified as type AB, along with traces of human DNA, though the genetic material is badly degraded. Of course, McCrone argued that the red stains were not blood, but microscopic particles of iron oxide, commonly known as red ochre. Still, his conclusion was sharply disputed, and is now largely rejected by other scientists. Additional proposals suggested that the image resulted from rubbing the cloth over a bas-relief sculpture or from scorching it against such a surface. Yet the image's physical and chemical properties do not support either idea. Another central line of inquiry focuses on natural chemical reactions. Since the image results from darkened cellulose fibers, researchers have asked what might have caused that change. In 2002, Raymond Rogers of Los Alamos National Laboratory proposed that mild heat could be responsible. He suggested that temperatures as low as 40 degrees Celsius might discolor carbohydrate compounds on the fiber surface, noting that a body dying from dehydration or overheating could briefly reach such levels. While this explanation avoids extraordinary assumptions, there is little evidence that similar effects occur on burial cloths under normal conditions. Other scientists have suggested that substances released by the body itself may have triggered the reaction. In the early 20th century, French biologist Paul Vignon proposed that ammonia was produced by the breakdown of urea in sweat. Still, this mechanism would likely make a blurred image rather than the sharply defined form seen on the shroud. In 1982, biophysicist John DeSalvo offered lactic acid from sweat as an alternative, comparing the effect to Volkringer images, in which leaves pressed between book pages slowly release compounds that react with paper fibers to form dark, negative impressions. A different and enduring theory treats the shroud as a form of photography. The realization that the image behaves like a photographic negative only deepened the mystery. Secondo Pia himself briefly suggested that some primitive photographic process might be involved. This idea was later developed by South African art historian Nicholas Allen, who argued that medieval scholars could, in principle, have created such an image using materials known long before modern photography emerged. Allen's proposal centers on silver nitrate, a light-sensitive compound that darkens when exposed to light, forming metallic silver. According to his research, this substance was known in the Middle Ages and described by the 8th century Arabic alchemist Jabir ibn Hayyan and the 13th century scholar Albertus Magnus. Allen suggested that a cloth coated with silver nitrate could have been placed in a dark chamber and exposed to sunlight through a quartz lens, since ultraviolet light affects silver nitrate and passes through quartz but not glass. Using this method, Allen successfully produced shroud-like images with model figures. Even so, the theory faces serious obstacles. It does not fully explain how the image would remain once the silver was removed, nor how medieval forgers could have mastered such advanced optics and chemistry without leaving any trace in historical records. Questions also persist about whether this process could reproduce the shroud's precise clarity and tonal range. For most researchers, the idea stands as an impressive demonstration of ingenuity rather than a convincing explanation. Another widely discussed view suggests that a release of energy created the image. An international group known as the Yahoo Shroud Science Group has argued that explanations linked to the resurrection cannot be dismissed outright. Within this framework, they point to possibilities involving energy emitted from the wrapped body or surface electrical discharges caused by intense electric fields. These proposals depend on processes outside established scientific knowledge, and because they assume events beyond ordinary physical laws, science has no practical way to test or disprove them. That uncertainty has not discouraged all researchers. Giulio Fanti, an Italian chemist at the University of Padua, has proposed that the image formed when a sudden burst of radiant energy affected only the outermost fibers of the linen.
To reproduce an image like that of the shroud, we can use a linen cloth, put on the sphere, and if with my hand I touch the linen,
he suggests this energy could have taken the form of intense visible light, ultraviolet radiation, X-rays, or streams of subatomic particles emitted from the body itself. He draws a parallel to a biblical account describing a moment when Christ's appearance and clothing became brilliantly bright. While this connection is indirect and interpretive, Fanti argues that modern experiments could at least test whether similar radiation can produce comparable effects on linen. Raymond Rogers was deeply skeptical of such ideas. He argued that many radiation-based explanations verge on pseudoscience, proposing not only a mechanism for the image, but also a way to dismiss radiocarbon dating results. In his view, these theories begin with the assumption that the shroud must be authentic and then work backward to justify that belief, rather than allowing the evidence to guide the conclusion. More than a decade after he raised these objections, the debate remains essentially unchanged, and the shroud continues to resist a single convincing explanation. After decades of research and countless theories about how the shroud was formed, some scientists attempted to recreate it themselves, and their experiments only deepened the mystery. Experimental attempts to recreate the crucifixion. In 1929, a group of researchers undertook a daring and controversial experiment to test whether the Shroud of Turin was authentic. They strapped human volunteers to a full-size cross and covered them in blood, aiming to see whether real crucifixion blood flow patterns could reproduce the stains observed on the linen. While most mainstream scientists continue to regard the shroud as a 14th century creation, the team sought to use direct physical recreation to explore its authenticity. The experiment was carefully designed. Volunteers were selected to match the body proportions seen in the shroud's front and back images. Special wrist and foot attachments allowed them to be suspended realistically on the cross, which could be adjusted to achieve precise alignment with the posture suggested by the cloth. Professional medical personnel oversaw every stage, ensuring participants' safety while monitoring and recording results. Blood was applied systematically, and the resulting flow patterns were meticulously documented and compared with those on the shroud. The study also aimed to challenge previous research on crucifixion bloodstains. Earlier forensic analyses, including a 1919 study, argued that the shroud's patterns reflected an anatomically incorrect posture, suggesting that its creator imagined victims with arms crossed above their heads, an arrangement historically disputed. The 1919 Colorado study sought to test these claims with a more realistic, hands-on reconstruction of crucifixion mechanics. Even so, consensus remains that the shroud's origin is medieval. Historical accounts and radiocarbon dating consistently point to a 14th century creation. Matteo Borini, a forensic scientist involved in earlier critiques, emphasized that faith and scientific evidence occupy distinct spheres. Personal belief may guide interpretation, but the shroud's authenticity must be judged through experimentation and data. This experiment is part of a long line of unconventional tests on the linen. John Jackson, a physicist who participated in the major 1978 scientific examination of the shroud, later proposed that the image might have been created by a burst of radiation from a disappearing body. Other researchers have analyzed remnants from that study, including pollen grains used to trace the cloth's historical movements and the stresses recorded in recovered fibers. Some tests have been particularly striking. In 2015, Giulio Fanti of the University of Padova attempted to replicate Jackson's radiation hypothesis by wrapping a mannequin in linen and subjecting it to a 300,000-volt electrical discharge for 24 hours. The ionized air produced visible markings on the cloth, but the experiment did not provide a definitive explanation for the shroud's image. Fanti noted that, despite decades of experimentation, no consistent physical mechanism has yet been found to account for its formation. Another enduring mystery of the shroud lies in its age. Scientific investigations have repeatedly uncovered evidence suggesting it may be a medieval creation. Radiocarbon dating the shroud. In 1988, independent radiocarbon dating tests were carried out at the University of Oxford, the University of Arizona, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, following years of negotiations to obtain the Holy See's permission. Samples were taken from a corner of the shroud, and the tests concluded with 95% confidence that the linen dated to between AD 1260 and 1930. This period aligns closely with the first documented appearance of the shroud in church records. It is slightly later than earlier art historical estimates, which suggested the cloth could be an 11th century icon created for liturgical use. Some proponents of the shroud's authenticity have challenged the radiocarbon results, proposing that the tested fragment might have been a medieval repair rather than the original cloth. Other alternative explanations included contamination from biological materials or exposure to carbon monoxide. However, each of these hypotheses has been scientifically examined and refuted, leaving the original dating intact. In recent years, statisticians have reanalyzed the 1988 radiocarbon data, exploring whether the results were entirely consistent across the three laboratories. These studies found evidence of inhomogeneity, which could stem from unidentified variations in the fabric samples or from differences in the cleaning procedures used before testing. A 2020 analysis suggested that a minor adjustment of 10 years to the results from two labs would reconcile the data, while an 88-year correction could align all results statistically. Beyond radiocarbon testing, modern digital analysis has been applied to the shroud's imagery. In 2011, researchers examined two photographs of the cloth, including a 1931 reproduction of Giuseppe Enri's photographic negative. Detailed processing found no hidden images of flowers, coins, or other objects on either image, contrary to some claims. DNA analysis has also revealed fascinating insights into the shroud's history. In 2015, Italian scientists studied human and non-human DNA collected from the shroud and its backing cloth during vacuuming sessions in 1977 and 1988. They identified traces of 19 plant taxa from regions including the Mediterranean, Central Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, Eastern Asia, and the Americas. Human mitochondrial DNA sequences were traced to diverse populations across Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and India. A few non-human sequences were also found, including birds and a marine worm native to the northern Pacific near Canada. Sequencing of pollen and dust confirmed that people from many regions had come into contact with the shroud over time. While this diversity does not rule out a medieval European origin, it is also compatible with a historical journey that might have carried the cloth from the Near East. It even raises the possibility of Indian linen manufacture. Palynological studies have offered further context. In 1960, Italian palynologist Marzia Boi proposed that the most abundant pollen on the shroud belonged to the genus Helichrysum, possibly originating from balms and ointments used in first-century burial rituals. Direct analysis of the pollen, however, identified it as Gundelia tournefortii, a plant native to the Near East. The anatomical consistency of the shroud image has also been examined repeatedly, beginning with Yves Delage in 1902. While Delage described the image as anatomically accurate, later researchers have questioned both its proportions and its plausibility as a representation of a real human body. Archaeological comparisons, such as the study of a crucified Roman found near Venice in 2007, reveal inconsistencies. The heel wounds do not match those depicted on the shroud, and no crucifixion victim studied to date shows evidence of wrist wounds. Critics have noted further anomalies. Joe Nickel in 1938 and Gregory S. Paul in 2010 argued that the shroud's proportions are unrealistic. According to Paul, the face is too small, the arms are elongated and uneven, and the posture is physically improbable. The depiction of the hands covering the genitals would have required deliberate elongation of the right arm and hand, suggesting artistic adjustment rather than faithful anatomical representation. Bloodstain analysis has added another layer of scrutiny. In 2018, experimental studies comparing blood flow patterns from crucifixion wounds with the shroud's marks revealed inconsistencies. The rivulets on the forearms and backs of the hands are not connected and would have required separate episodes of bleeding. Similarly, the blood patterns on the front of the body do not align with those on the lumbar area, even assuming multiple bleeding events. These findings suggest that the shroud's image could be an artistic or instructional creation. How do modern researchers interpret this evidence? The Shroud of Turin could be fake. On September 20th, historians announced a remarkable discovery. The earliest known record suggesting that the Shroud of Turin was deliberately fabricated, found in a text much older than previously recognized. The French philosopher Nicole Oresme, celebrated for his careful scholarship and critical thinking, may have been among the first to voice skepticism about the shroud. Around 1370, he wrote that the cloth was likely a fake, intentionally created for the church's purposes. These insights appear in his Problemata, a collection of writings composed between 1355 and 1388, recently examined by historian Nicolas Sarzeau at the Catholic University of Louvain in Belgium. While studying an unpublished treatise, Sarzeau uncovered the passage and immediately recognized its significance. Oresme's assessment was deliberate and methodical. He approached religious claims critically, questioning the nature of belief itself and why people accept certain phenomena as accurate. His reflections make clear that his doubts about the shroud were not casual, but the result of reasoned analysis. Until now, historians have relied on documents from 1389 to 1390, particularly a letter from Pierre d'Arcy, Bishop of Troyes, who accused the shroud of being a forgery by an artist. Oresme's critique predates these records by nearly 2 decades, offering a rare glimpse into early skepticism. He cautioned against assuming that miraculous phenomena were genuine, citing the shroud as an example of claims that require scrutiny. He described a manifest experience in a Champagne church where it was claimed the shroud of Christ was kept. The historical context makes Oresme's observations especially compelling. The shroud first appeared in Champagne around 1355, depicting a naked man with long hair and a beard, and reddish-brown marks resembling crucifixion wounds. Its image sparked immediate fascination, with reports claiming it had once wrapped Christ's body and performed miracles. Local church authorities quickly took notice. Henri de Poitiers, Bishop of Troyes, reportedly denounced it as fraudulent after confronting the alleged artist, and decades later Pierre d'Arcy repeated the accusation. The Pope eventually allowed the shroud to remain on display, only as a symbolic representation of Christ's burial cloth. Over the centuries, the shroud was moved several times, ultimately arriving in Turin in 1578, where it remains today at the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. Scholars such as Andrea Nicolodi, professor of Christian history at the University of Turin, highlight the cloth's complex weaving, which suggests looms unlikely to exist before the 13th century, reinforcing its medieval European origin. Yet the image continues to intrigue. Nicolodi notes that its faint, detailed depiction cannot easily be explained by human contact alone. Only two possibilities remain plausible. The image is either miraculous or deliberately created by an artist. While many Christians favor a miraculous explanation, historical analysis and Oresm's early skepticism make the artistic explanation far more convincing. Oresm also warned of human motives behind alleged miracles, noting that clergy might exploit relics to solicit donations. His words suggest that medieval observers were capable of discernment, recognizing the potential for deception, even in revered objects. The discovery of Oresm's critique adds a crucial dimension to the Shroud's story. For centuries, debates have centered on later documents and radiocarbon tests, but now we know that skepticism arose almost immediately after its appearance. This early doubt predates the Bishop of Troyes' accusations and centuries of scientific study, revealing that the Shroud has always been a contested and provocative artifact. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.